right? For decades, I would have never described myself as a creative being. I didn't do art or traditional acts of creativity. I didn't realize that we all have a creative nature, and a lot of us are just prevented from embodying that creative nature, not because there's something inherently wrong with us, but because of the way our nervous system has adapted or has learned to function.
Welcome to the Female Leadership Podcast. My name is Vera Strauch, and in today's episode, we are taking a closer look at something which is often overlooked, but very important for anything we do, our nervous system. And it's one of the game changers for me in the past years. And I am honored to have a super special guest on the show today. She is one of the experts on the topic. Dr. Nicole LePera is an American psychologist known for her holistic approach on mental health. On Instagram, she reaches more than 8.5 million people with her account, The Holistic Psychologist. Her work involves self-healing and the integration of body, mind, and soul. And for that, she combines traditional psychological approaches with holistic methods and emphasizes the importance of nutrition, exercise, and mindfulness for mental well-being. Nicole and I talk about our nervous system, how it reacts to stress and trauma, and how we can calm it and gain trust in ourselves and our bodies. We also speak about breaking cycles and patterns and how to maintain hope even in difficult times. Her new book is out now in German. It's called Heile deine Beziehungen, and we will speak about this and relationships as well. And just one quick disclaimer, if you're suffering from mental illness, books and podcasts can be an additional help, but it's crucial to get support, professional medical support, and we will put links on that in the show notes. Now, enjoy the episode, and let's dive right in. Nicole, welcome to the show. It is so great to have you.
It's such an honor to be here, Vera. Thank you. And truly thank you for bringing this conversation about nervous system wellness into the world of female leadership. So truly thank you. It's so integral, so foundational, and I'm looking forward to diving in right alongside of you.
Being loved for who we truly are, and not having to fulfill any requirements, not having to do anything in particular, any achievements, any pleasing, just being loved and accepted. It's something you write about in your book right in the beginning, and it resonated with me so much. This, I don't know, it's like a desire and something I think so many people can relate to. And in English, the title of your book is called How to Be the Love You Seek, which I love. And maybe you can share a little bit about your, I call it for myself something like an awakening. So becoming more aware of myself and also of the power I have in terms of who I can be and also how I can be in my relationships. Can you share a bit of that and your personal journey maybe?
Even hearing you, I believe I heard you use the word hope, even a longing. So much of that is in resonance with my experience in relationship, which is I always had found myself over time, over decades, really, since I entered my first relationship in my teenage years, having a similar hope, really wanting to be authentically known, to feel truly supported, right? And truly connected to the relationships around me. Yet at the same time, that was not the lived experience that I was having. I continued to find myself. It seemingly didn't matter who I was dating, where I met the person, how long the relationship was. I would always find myself somewhere into the relationship after, right, the initial honeymoon period, if you will, not feeling, for me, it was a sense of just not feeling fully connected, not feeling fully known, not feeling truly supported. And I didn't have the awareness or the understanding. I didn't necessarily know why. And for decades, what I thought was the cause was that, I think, as a lot of us do, I thought I was just picking or finding the wrong partners.
Mm-hmm.
So before long, after feeling this way, the relationship would end for whatever reason, and I would then find myself meeting a new person, creating again a similar relationship, only to feel the same way. And so for me, it took kind of an awakening of sorts, one that actually was inspired, not necessarily by this disconnection that I was pervasively feeling in my relationship. It was actually inspired by some physical symptoms that I'd come to learn, at least, were a manifestation of my dysregulated or overwhelmed nervous system that sent me on really an online exploration, trying to figure out for myself why not only physically I was struggling as I was, why I was seeing so many of the similar emotional patterns in myself, feeling disconnected, as I just described, that I was seeing in the clients whom which I was working. And for me, that period of discovery was life-changing, because what I'd come in contact with at that point was a whole new world of science that included the body. And so for me, coming from a very traditional training program here in the West, which overemphasizes or puts even the sole focus on our thinking mind and really highlights this believed power of our thoughts to create change and our emotions and ultimately what we do. And what I was really coming up against was that wasn't what I was seeing in my clients, and that's not what I was experiencing in my own journey. So for me, it was really then learning the impact of the body, of our nervous system, of all of the, as we like to use a computer analogy, right? The wiring or the programming that for all of us begins at a very early time in life, in childhood, that is impacted not only by our environments, our external environments, but also our interpersonal or our relationships, and then quite literally contributes to, quote unquote, how we're wired, or subconsciously, right, this autopilot, how we are in the world, which of course creates habits in how we think, habits in how we feel, and ultimately habits in how we relate to other people. So just quickly to wrap the story up, what I'd come to understand was all of the learning that I had done in my own childhood created habits of disconnection that I was actually bringing to these relationships, while at the same time, I was holding these hypothetical partners responsible. And once I had that powerful piece of awareness, not only could I relieve, right, all of the guilt that I was throwing on other people, relieve the shame that I was feeling, thinking that maybe I'm just not someone who's meant to have a supported, comforting relationship. And then I actually had some new tools that, of course, included the body, the nervous system in particular, to begin to create actual change, so that I, and as we all can in the work that I now put out in the form of books, create the relationships, I should say, that we deserve, truly, authentically connected ones in which we could be ourselves. And of course, extending this to then leadership and the work that we do, right? We show up bringing all of those subconscious habits. And a lot of times it is the way we then perform, either an overemphasis on performance or an under ability to perform, not feeling purposeful, not feeling passionate, that can 100% bleed into our business world, if you will.
Especially if you want to show up as a whole person, you want to be vulnerable, you need to have met yourself on that level to be able to share it. So I think it's so crucial for us also in terms, it's something we cannot skip if we want to do good jobs in terms of working with people, but also I think creating something, which is also something that you are writing about.
100%. The impact is so pervasive that some of us struggle to have the motivation, the energy, the ability to pay attention to the work that might be very near and dear to our hearts. Some of us, this is what I saw a pattern in myself, we become so over-focused on performance that we lose sight of the person behind, right? The accolades, the awards, our ability to even think clearly or be creative and imaginative and think toward, future solutions that are different than the things that we've continued to repeat. All of these are a function of that nervous system that's working behind the scenes for a lot of us outside of our awareness. So all we know, or all what we assume to know is, oh, I'm just unmotivated, right? Maybe there's something just wrong with me. I can't stop procrastinating. Or in my case, oh, I'm only what I do and how I perform. And no one cares or considers me. I'm worth nothing beyond what I do, right? And others really struggle to embody that which I think is a universal capacity for creativity, right? For decades, I would have never described myself as a creative being. I didn't do art or traditional acts of creativity. I didn't realize that we all have a creative nature, and a lot of us are just prevented from embodying that creative nature, not because there's something inherently wrong with us, but because of the way our nervous system has adapted or has learned to function. So as far as I'm concerned, the nervous system is truly at the foundation of both a lot of what we're struggling with or a lot of the ways that we're stuck, whether it's in our professional life or our personal life or whatever aspect of our life. And then our nervous system is actually then that which holds the possibility of change in any and all of those areas.
You were describing it as the wires, how we are wired. Yeah. So, and I like the picture, and maybe people haven't seen it. So it's this picture of, if you imagine a body, you see all these nerves that are basically anywhere in our body. And if you just have this human figure and you see all these nerves, it's like there are wires everywhere. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the nervous system, right? So maybe for
Yes.
all the beginners.
100%. I appreciate, you asking for clarity. So I love that visual. We're talking about all of the internal wiring that governs or allows us to, everything from even things that we don't have to think about, like breathing, like digestion, right? Like waking and sleeping, things that just seemingly happen, whether or not we have a say or control of it at all. Very much like you're describing kind of the wires. It does not only that which we don't have to pay attention to and all of the systems and functions that just keep our body alive. It plays a role in terms of how clear our thoughts are, right? It plays a role in terms of how our energy feels, which impacts then how we show up or embody that energy, not only in our own personal experiences, but even beyond the internal wiring. Our nervous system, we actually now know, verified by science, extends outside of our body. Now, of course, this isn't a world of things that we can see, like we could see with certain microscopes and medical technology. We could quite literally see these nerves that you're describing internally. What we can't see, though, that which is still happening, is the unseen signals or shifts in energy that then extend beyond our body that impact other bodies around us. So you and I were having a talk. I have someone else in the room with me who's making sure this all looks and sounds good. He's a couple feet away from me. And in reality, his nervous system is sensing and sending signals to my nervous system outside of both of our awareness. So again, the nervous system, again, is very foundationally important for how our individual bodies function internally, of course, and also is kind of our interface, to continue with the computer analogy, right? It's the way in which we sense the world around us, because what our nervous system governs, from it kind of tending to those physiological sleep, wake, digestion cycles, right, that keep us alive. The external portion of its function in keeping us alive is assessing outside of our awareness 24 hours a day, even when we're not paying attention to the fact that it's doing it, the safety that we're experiencing within our environment. And if and when our nervous system detects something that's unsafe, a loud noise, which is why many of us jump. Even if we're sleeping, we might even be woken up by a door slam, right? We weren't consciously paying attention to the fact that we were paying attention, but our nervous system was. And certain things, sensations outside of us, signals or factors outside of us will signal threat. And then outside of our awareness, we don't have to even choose. Our nervous system will, to sustain our life, initiate a set of responses to help us find or maintain safety as quick as possible. So again, it is so foundational, not only for how we're functioning it is so foundational, our nervous system, that is, for how we're perceiving and functioning safely in the world around us. Though the reality for a lot of us, myself included, is the wiring that was created in those early environments don't always create an experience of us being calm, grounded, right? Don't allow us to be accessible to our creativity and everything that we were talking about earlier. And instead, what we're living then within is a dysregulated system, if you will, which of course then has its own impacts, though verified by science. Again, we now know very gratefully that change, or our body's ability to rewire our nervous system, the scientific word is called neuroplasticity. So it's the ability of our brain and all of the neurons and nerves that kind of extend out from our brain to change or to create new wiring, to continue to use that analogy, at any age. And that's a incredibly empowering and inspirational, in my opinion, piece of information that then can be acted upon, so that each of us have the tools, if we are realizing, maybe as a result of this conversation, that we are living with some dysregulation that is not only impacting ourselves, it's impacting our ability to show up in our relationships and our impact on the world around us. We can create that new wiring at any time.
Safety is something that is crucial. We need to feel safe to go to any other level, basically. If we're not safe, it's limited what we can do. I'm trying to rephrase it in easy language. So it's safety is crucial. If I don't feel safe because I heard a loud noise, I cannot fully focus on what I was doing. And this is not only the case if there's an actual threat or something externally happening, but for many people, that's what you were saying with being wired that way because of childhood trauma experiences that we made. We are, and I can speak for myself actually, I have been in a physical state for a long, long time in which I was basically all the time in sort of a threat. So my nervous system was with I think a few exceptions and situations, basically all the time like switched on and in a high stress mode. And maybe we can talk a bit about that so people can maybe relate. And some of them might even say, like I did for myself, I didn't know that. I was for myself, I was constantly in this overachieving and perfectionism, and I'm just delivering and disconnected, and still am, by the way, but I'm getting better at it. So disconnected from parts, from basically my body and my emotions, or some emotions at least.
I appreciate you sharing your journey that I very much relate to, very similar to my own, and so wise, you picking up on the reality that what we're talking about here, right? This even assessment or evaluation of what's, to really simplify it, safe or unsafe, isn't necessarily objective, right? We learn by what has once happened by association in childhood, and then repeatedly by similar occurrences happening. And I'll go a little bit deeper into that in a second. But we learn really simply what's safe and unsafe. And then many of us, right, begin to feel foundationally, if we didn't have what we needed in childhood, we carry a lack of safety. And as a result, the behaviors that go along with that, right? The hypervigilance, the always scanning and focusing on something outside of myself, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Sometimes it looks like this overemphasis, like I was sharing, on achievement. Other times it looks like we're completely shut down and we're not really here. We don't feel very present. We struggle to pay attention. And all of that is our body's at one time adaptation, typically, to that which is unsafe. So just breaking down the nervous system really quickly, right? When we're always scanning for safety. And in childhood, we are born in human form as a completely dependent creature, meaning we feel really unsafe all of the time because we can't protect ourselves. We can't feed ourselves. If we really want to reduce it, right? I'm going to use the word survival. We can't survive on our own. And so we are so dependent on the caregivers, the circumstances, the environment that we're born into to create safety. And ideally, if we have a physically present caregiver, which not all of us do, right? Some of us were left home alone if we had parents that had to go out for whatever reason, and for financial reasons, for other reasons, right? If we have someone who's not only physically present, but they're emotionally attuned, which means they sense and they're able to show up for us when we're in distress or dysregulated, or really simply when we're crying as a child. More so, it's not just important for them to physically be present and them to be attuned to know that we're upset. They, in their bodies, have to be able to find a peace and calm, grounded place, because our nervous system quite literally needs to not just feel them telling us from their verbally, you're going to be okay, hush, 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 little baby, you're okay. Our nervous system, just like I was using myself and Furkan, who's here with me, right, is communicating. So unless that parent feels grounded and okay, the child isn't going to actually be able to go from stressed or upset back to peace and grounded calm. And I want to emphasize that, because we are wired to deal with stressful experiences. It is never an expectation. So I do want to speak this, because some of us, I think, have this idea or maybe hope that to be healed or somewhere on this journey, we get to this utopian place where we never feel stressed out, where we never feel upset, right? That's not the case. We are equipped to deal with stress. Again, as initiated by our nervous system, physiological shifts and changes happen when we perceive stress, whether it's accurate, real, imagined, what have you. Our heart begins to race, our breath begins to quicken, our muscles begin to tense, getting ready for action. And then when the stress ends naturally, or when we're comforted by that attuned caregiver and their nervous system tells us that it's safe to relax, and we relax into their arms, then all of those systems deactivate. Our breath begins to slow. Our heart rate begins to go back to its normal range, whatever that is for each of us. And the tension in our muscles releases and we feel at ease again. And if and when that doesn't happen naturally, so I do like to emphasize that, because the goal is to teach our body how to deal with more and more stress, to learn how to be with it when it's activated without doing what a lot of us do, screaming and yelling when we feel all that energy, or shutting down completely because we're so overwhelmed by it. So to be present with the energy and then to calm our body. And when that doesn't happen, a lot of us have the experience that you're describing, which is we find ourselves somewhere into our adulthood, we wake up, if you will, and we come to realize that we are living in what I would call that survival mode. Our body never has gone back into that peace and calm. When I ask you to even right now, or suggest you to do a quick scan of your body, you might be noticing a lot of tension. Maybe you're clenching your jaw. Maybe your shoulders are up by your ears. Maybe your back feels tight. Maybe if I ask you to just notice your breath, you might notice that you are holding your breath. Or maybe it's your breath is so quick and so shallow, it almost feels like you just got back from a walk, even though you're sitting on your couch, right? Similarly with your heart rate. And these are things that then I just took us through a quick check-in, checking in with my muscles. How do they feel? Checking in with my breath. Where's it coming from? Is it quick? Is it slow? Checking in with my heart rate. Is it its normal rhythm, or is it beating out of its chest? And all of those are indicative, right? So if you're going through this assessment, you feel the tension, you feel the heart rate elevation, you feel the breath very quickened. You might even notice in your mind, because our mind reflects our body. You might notice racing thoughts, reflecting stressful thoughts, negative thoughts, reflecting the tension in my body, right? All of that is beautiful information that possibly you are either in a stress response right now, maybe because something stressful is happening, or maybe you're like both you and myself and many of us, right? You might be chronically stuck where you are to some very real extent perceiving threats in everything. And some of us have learned a connection, right, between certain things. Partners being distant in a relationship, right, feels like abandonment. We go into this survival reaction. And there's, of course, many things that prompt it, though noticing when our body is in that survival mode will allow us not only to be a bit more compassionate and empathetic when we find ourselves kind of habitually reacting, being stuck in a sense. And it also then will hold the key to begin to create actual change by regulating that dysregulated nervous system.
Where to start? That's the I mean, you were talking about checking in with yourself, and I assume people who are listening, as I did, were doing it for themselves, and this is one of the first things, or something that you can always do anywhere you are, right? What is a good way to, for yourself, for the people who are listening, to start? Is it because I think you have these 3 levels of, you have the physical, the body, you have the emotion, and then we have the spirit. And maybe we take these, or did I forget something? Is that, first of all, is that okay? Is that correct?
Yes, those are the correct levels. And I can actually kind of take us through.
Yeah.
And you word them in the very intentional, correct order, if you will, because I am of the belief that everything, our emotional worlds, and ultimately our ability to even connect with however it is that we define our spiritual self, our energy, our energetic body, our soul, whatever word, essentially what that means to me is the uniqueness in each of us, our very unique, diverse way of expressing ourselves while we're all kind of different than each other. It all, in my opinion, begins and is impacted by that foundational level of the physical body. So that you will always hear me, as I often do, I simplify a lot of these conversations, a lot of the kind of practical steps to change, in hopes that, of course, it can, give people the opportunity to not only understand, but to apply these things in a practical way. So in a simplified manner, I will always break down any process of changing anything in our life, something that many of us want to do, some of us more so, a lot more often than others, into 2 steps. And the first step to be able to change is to become conscious or simply present, aware, to witness, to observe, whatever kind of language resonates, of what's currently happening. Because I used the word when we were talking about the wiring, I think I might have said, and if I didn't, I'll offer it here, I might have described it as living subconsciously, right? Meaning outside of our awareness. I also use the word autopilot. Our brain, because it has so much to do in any given moment to sustain our physiological existence, to allow ourselves all of the very powerful ways that we can utilize our mind, it needs a lot of caloric energy. It needs a lot of attentional energy. It needs a lot. So it's kind of streamlined the day-to-day for itself, even allowed itself to conserve calories to some extent by shifting us into what we could call autopilot, or things that we don't have to think about. The most common way of describing what this looks like is if you have a route that you travel, right, to and from work, or even driving a car, for those of you who drive a car, right? At some time in the beginning of learning how to drive a car, you had to pay attention to everything, right? To put the key in, the thing on the gas. You had to remember which red light you turn. You drive long enough. You drive the same route long enough. Now, I mean, you could drive to and from work, not thinking a thing about how to drive the car, not even really paying attention to making the right turn, yet you can still arrive home safely where you want to be, having used that route, right? So that's a prime example of autopilot. And of course, I'm using a very common example of to and from work, though we have an autopilot, we have programming, if you will, in every area of our life. And so the awareness, right, beginning to pay attention to the habits, whether they're habits in how we're caring for our physical body, whether they're habitual thoughts or the typical ways that we interpret the events, the beliefs that we have about what's happening around us, whether it's habitual ways that we've learned to navigate our emotions. The more you pay attention to yourself, the more you'll start to see certain emotions tend to feel certain ways in your body. You then tend to do certain things very patterned. We're not unique in any of those ways, right? We typically do the same things. So when we, step one, begin to pay attention to what habits are wired into that subconscious mind, now we can create the opportunity to take step two, which is not just to allow that autopilot to take us through the same habitual reaction, which is why so many of us are stuck, but to make a new choice, right? To show up in a different way. So those will always be the steps to change. I become conscious of what's happening, really simply, and then I begin to make new choices that will better benefit me. And then just applying that to those 3 levels. And intentionally, I did that kind of check-in around the kind of markers of stress, building in moments in our day to begin to foundationally, first and foremost, going even back to the conversation about safety, paying attention to our body, right? So many of us are walking around paying so much attention to our thoughts in our mind, or paying so much attention to everyone else around us and what they want, what they need, or how we need to perform to deliver for this project, that very few of us pay any attention, if at all, to how our body is feeling in any given moment, whether it's stress that we were talking about earlier, going through that. How am I breathing? How is my heart? How are my muscles? What's my muscular tension doing? Checklist. But even more so, just paying attention to the typical habits in terms of our physical self-care. Because again, I'm trying not to really simplify this. Our nervous system lives in a physical body, so it has similar physical needs, which again, I could really simplify to the need for nutrients in our dense food, right? Not eating food that's going to stress our body out because it's filled with toxins or because it's causing inflammation. In addition to nutrients, our body needs sleep at night and periods of rest throughout the day. Similarly, it needs, to whatever ability our body has, movement of some sort to discharge our energy. And those, as far as I'm concerned, are universal needs that our nervous system has. So outside of, right, these check-ins, becoming conscious in the moment as I'm noticing my body become stressed, so that I can learn to calm and regulate my body before I do that habitual thing that I always do when I'm stressed, I can begin to commit to small shifts in those areas each day, paying more attention to how I'm eating foods that will, give my nervous system and my body the fuel it needs, pay attention to how I'm sleeping at night or resting throughout the day. And then similarly, beginning to pay attention to if and when I'm moving. And all of that then in that foundational level of the body, becoming more conscious to being in a body, creating these opportunities to create more safety in the body through nervous system wellness, through those consistent lifestyle habits, and nervous system regulation, those in the moment times where we're stressed and we want to calm ourselves down, will then just lay a foundation for us to then have a new relationship with our emotional world, staying more calm, grounded, and regulated, able to hold space for someone who's feeling differently in a different moment. And then, of course, right, evolving up the pyramid, if you will, it'll allow us to, as we began the conversation, to connect with our spiritual essence, to know who we are, what we really want, what our purpose is, how to be the creative being that we all are.
I would like to go to the emotional level from there, because I had for a couple of years, I've been reading and talking to people about this nervous system and how it works and how safe I feel. And I've done therapy and coaching and everything. So I had a situation the other day. I was at an event and I spoke, and I was just a participant, and I spoke up after the event. There were people on stage, and I asked a question, and I was not happy with the way I asked the question. And in my opinion, I did not perform. So I loved the 2 women on stage, and I'm a super fan, and I was not happy with myself. And I went out of this event and I was like, oh my God, Vera, what did you do? People think you are, you're not smart and whatever. So I was, to speak with your terms, I think it was sort of a habit of myself, of my beliefs, of the way I'm, it was triggering something in me, and something and I'm proud that I observed it. I could physically feel it. I was at night, I was at home, I was speaking to my husband, and I felt the physical response of this moment. For many hours after that, I couldn't fall asleep. And why am I sharing this? Because I find it very interesting how these levels are connected. And I wanted to ask you what are your thoughts or your maybe recommendations if people after this interview maybe observe themselves after an uncomfortable situation or somewhere where they're not happy with themselves, and can be very different what we are not happy about ourselves, at least for myself. So what can I do once the physical and the emotional, it's like they touch or something like that, because they are connected, and what can I do?
I have to say, Vera, I'm giggling because quite literally 2 or 3 days ago, I had a very similar experience myself, where after an event, I did not do or say something to the, retrospectively how I would have liked to have done or said it in the moment. Mm-hmm. And similar to you, I found myself carrying the thought with me, replaying what I said versus what I could have said, right? And then feeling as a result, bad about myself, like I underperformed, like I disappointed the people who were viewing what it was that I was saying and doing in that moment. And so thank you for sharing. You're very resonating. And again, I share from my own experience because I really do want people to understand, not only give them other moments to obviously relate, seeing themselves and experiences that both you and I are sharing, but also to illustrate that this is a process. This is a journey, right? I continue to teach this every day, day in and day out, and write books about it. And yet here I am saying, oh yeah, 2 days ago, same thing just happened to me, right? This is a perfect illustration of how deep these wiring go. Though even back to, I love that you use the word observe. We now know, right? We used to put the mind and the brain above all things. And we used to think that there was like a one directional path of communication, meaning we think thoughts, and we can have that experience, right? The more you think about this moment you underperform, the worse then you feel. So we had very good reason to think, oh, okay, it's the thoughts in our mind that cause everything else that's happening in our body. We didn't yet know until we truly began, as we're still learning the power of the body. Just as much as the mind is sending information down, the body is sending information up. So like I said earlier, a lot of times the thoughts that we're thinking in our mind are reflective of what's happening in our body. And even like I heard you say, it's kind of blurry between, right, what's my body and what happens when the physical becomes the emotional. The reality of it is, and again, this is something newer that I've learned and now share even as a clinical psychologist, right, seemingly the doctor of emotion. It took until more recently in the field for us to truly understand what emotions are. Emotions aren't something that live in our mind in reality. Emotions are physiological events, sensations, shifts and changes in our body. And so that blurring is created by the reality that there is a blurring between the physical and the emotional. And so all of us, right, because in those moments, and this is why we can't just tell ourselves to stop thinking that thought, tell ourselves that we did good enough and no one's expecting us to be perfect and we should feel okay about it. Because in the moment, while we might be telling ourselves that in our mind, our body is telling our mind something else. Our body is saying, actually, no, right? This moment of underperforming. And I really want to emphasize how important social bonds and perception and reality is for us. Back in that childhood of dependency, when I said we need our caregivers, if I want to even expand that statement, we need relationships. We are social creatures. And so it is a very real threat, whether it happens in childhood or in adulthood, whether it's real or imagined, when we either experience or perceive ourselves to be experiencing rejection, abandonment. It actually literally activates the physical pain center in our brain. We are so motivated to stay in group. And so I really want to, again, emphasize, and I share this because a lot of us feel shameful when we're like perfectionists and we can't just give ourselves a break and we can't just get over, right, this moment where someone maybe was shaming us or we did feel embarrassed. And the real reason we can't, again, is because we're wired to really take our social connections very seriously and to feel the impact. So practically then speaking, the reason why I'm going into this wiring and how inherent it is and how natural it is because in those moments, even after listening to a conversation like this, I'm sure maybe a lot of listeners are like, yes, I'm a perfectionist. I criticize myself. I hold myself up to these high expectations. So maybe I have the idea that, I should stop that. Don't anticipate or expect that voice to go away or that reaction to go away. It's not going to. The next time, right, we perform in a way that is not to our expectation or what we imagine others expect to us, chances are the reaction's going to be in my body. I'm going to feel tense, tight. My heart's going to race. I might blush, right, feeling embarrassed. I might start to sweat or shake or whatever it is for us. And likely then the thoughts are going to map on to that stress reaction, that threat reaction. My mind's going to tell me I'm a loser. I'm not worth it. I'm being, critical thoughts are going to happen. That awareness piece is so powerful because the moment we notice the tension we're holding in our body, or the moment we notice the critical thoughts that are racing through our mind, again, without shaming them, that's the reason why I kind of went into all of the evolutionary under kind of foundation of this. We can notice, and then what we can do, we can't stop the thought. What we can do, and that choice, right, the second step of change, once I've noticed what's happening, I'm paying attention to thoughts and my body is tense. Now I can do one of two things. I can release the tension in my body. I can calm and slow my breath. I can get some air if I started to sweat, right? I can do from the body up some calming, regulating. I can take a walk. And then from the top down or in my mind, can't stop the thought, but what I can choose to do is how much time am I going to allow myself to pay attention to that thought so I can remove my focus or unhook my attention. So instead of sitting there for the next 10 minutes lost in a shame spiral, right, I can note that my thoughts are shameful right now or shaming, and I can focus my attention somewhere, anywhere else, on the breath that's running through my body, on the feeling of my body on that walk that I took myself on. I can put in some music and just listen to the music. I can pay attention to maybe the thing in front of me that I'm supposed to be doing. And then the reality of it is, just to continue this tape forward, I can do it again and again and again every time my attention shifts back to those negative, stressful, shaming, underperforming, perfectionistic, whatever your brand of thinking is. But I like to describe, right, we can't stop what's happening, but we can make new choices about not only how much are we paying attention to the story in our mind that's often very inaccurate, and at the same time, can I, from the bottom up, support my body in returning to that peace and calm so that my mind then can return to the peace and calm.
What about other people who are capable, and I have met a few, which is super special, capable of holding someone who's experiencing, and it's not even, in my case, it's not something other people might have even noticed, but in myself, I mean, I was stressed. Yeah. So it was not, I wouldn't say it's like a big deal and breakdown. But it's still something that really moved me. And what about other people, if we are lucky to have them in our lives, whom we can call, who we can talk to, who are able to hold this emotion with us? Because for myself, I know one of my biggest challenges and the biggest transformation really, I think, is physically and like feeling emotion and not turning away from it. So, and certain emotions I don't like. I'm good at joy. So I experienced that it's super special if you have someone who can hold a difficult emotion with yourself, so you can walk through, and it's not even something you need to have an hour for, but it's just this moment of, okay, I'm not running away, I'm pushing a little bit through at least.
And what a special gift, really, that is to have someone to share that emotional space. Because I truly believe that is universally all we want in those moments. right? We don't want someone to tell us about the time it happened to them. We don't want someone to solve our problem for us, right? We might know the solution or tried the solution, or we truly just want, and again, this is a need and a want that begins in childhood. And oftentimes so many well-meaning parents, right? Not because of any ill intent on their part, but because they themselves can't sit with their own emotions, let alone sit with the emotional experience that their child, right, born of them, are having. So what happens early on, right, is we don't get that level. We don't get that space. We don't get that emotional attunement. We don't have someone that just is allowing us to be in our emotion. So then we develop these habits in terms of turning away from our emotions, right? Not spending any time in our body, just being over analytical in our thinking mind, or erupting from our emotions. The second we have an emotion, we just project it outward and we're screaming and we're yelling. And again, because many of us past through generations haven't had these tools to truly be with our emotions. And so if and when, this is one of the major inspirations, honestly, for me to kind of translate what I was doing in individual client work, which is where this journey began. I kind of like shifted my practice from more traditional talk-based therapy to more holistic wellness, the conversations that we're having now. And then very quickly, I started to see and hear from people the desire for, and I started to research community and how powerful community can be, and how few of us have this level of true support because we're not surrounded, for whatever reason, by people in our proximity, in our environment, or we're not yet in relationships with people who can offer us that. So a big inspiration of doing now the community-based membership work and just general community work I do on the social media platforms was in not only teaching this information so that we can all become that empathetically attuned person to give people, the same experience that we're wanting, but so that we can find some relationships with others where we can be ourselves, where we can safely share what's happening, where we have someone on the receiving end who has the ability. Because again, this is another kind of aspect of the conversation earlier. We might have very well-meaning people with whom we're in a relationship with, who hypothetically, right, want to be that person for us. But if in those moments where we're going to disclose or share something upsetting that's happening to us, if they don't in their body have the ability or the resilience, like we talked about, to go from stressed and upset to not, to stay peace and calm and grounded, and to actually shift their focus from how they feel about what they're hearing to how we're feeling and what we're sharing, right? Then we're not going to be able to just do the thing. And this is why so many of us feel, like I did, disconnected from our relationships. A lot of us feel frustrated with our partners. We don't feel like we're getting the attunement that we need. And it's not because they might very much want to give us and be that person. But this is quite literally something we can, and many of us have to, teach our physical body to do, to be open, to be receptive, not to become so dysregulated ourselves by what we're hearing that we naturally then shift focus, driven by our survival brain, right back to us, and that we're actually able to just hold space and share that emotional space again, which is what I truly believe will translate to authentic relationships, true emotional intimacy, and very, very realistically what most of us are looking for.
Yeah. And I mean, I personally, I think it's such a big motivation for myself to do the work with myself, because I am so grateful. I want to be a person who's able to hold the space. And I also, on a bigger level, I mean, I think your work is so important, because this ripple effect that I see once people are able to give this, and it can really transform lives. And for me, it was, I mean, I met people who, and it was only small moments, but where I had all of a sudden totally different experiences in this relationship and then with myself. And it gave me it's like little nuggets of safety through the experiences with other people that helped me to feel safe enough to look inward and to do the messy things. So I'm
So
so grateful
beautiful.
for that. I think it's so important. And I even for myself, I see the work part, which is often sort of left out of these conversations. I think it's so important because even at work, I can meet a colleague who is able to hold emotional space, or in the best case, it's my boss or someone who is someone with power who is able to share a certain kind of vulnerability, and who just, because work is so present in our lives, it gives, there's so much room for interpersonal experiences that we can use to shift things. so thank you so much. I mean, I have such, I'm a little stressed, I have to say, because I have such a long list of things I wanted to talk to you about, and our interview is almost over. So maybe, maybe it's more like, is there something else you would like to share, or that's very important to you to add to our conversation?
I just want to actually to kind of expand on what you're saying in terms of the possible degree of impact that we can have. And I love how beautifully you've been able to meet people along the way, right? To kind of model, teach these moments of safety, which then have translated. So, of course, if the more of us, right, that gain this information, this awareness, and begin this journey of healing, of regulating our dysregulation, of showing up in a calm, grounded space, who we are, right, allowing space for other people to safely and securely truly be who they are. Of course, there's an endless, and I think many of us who are living this journey see, of shifts that happen in our personal worlds and our personal relationships, and the way that we are able to engage with others with whom we engage with. But I really want to kind of expand and emphasize, and I think speak to maybe the reality too of the people we don't know, right? The people who we can't actively change. I think something that's very natural, universally human is we want to change people, right? We don't like how someone is showing up or talking to us at work, and we'd like them to talk to us differently, or, we just wish that someone would see or get, or, have the awareness we have and change the way that they're showing up for whatever reason that it'll be of benefit to us. And very difficult reality to live into is that we can't necessarily, in at least the direct way that we think, change people. And I think this very much applies to work, right? To the colleagues that aren't as safe and nice and supportive, who are quite difficult and combative, and, make our job and our, interpersonal experience at work, and maybe even our performance, more difficult. And so the impact that I want to highlight here, and it kind of ties everything together, we were talking about not only, right, the internal wiring, but when I introduced this concept of the external energy that is coming or being sent out from our nervous system and our heart outside of our awareness, that is actually the area in which we can impact far greater change than we are even fully capable of measuring. And what I mean when I say this is there's been a ton of research. It's headed by somewhere in the States called the Heart Math Institute. And it studies simply the energetic signals that come from our heart. Of course, part of our nervous system. We talked about our heartbeat, because we've come to realize that in addition to our nervous system sending signals, right, externally away from our body, our heart signals that it similarly sends actually as a far more distant impact than our nervous system. I think they landed on around 6 feet. So if we were to put an electrode in water, say 6 feet away from me, it would be able to detect the signals that were coming from my heart. So just to use that as a description. So what we've come to now research, and researchers are still in the beginning as far as I'm concerned, they've come to see, okay, well, if people are in a calm, grounded state, as we've kind of been talking about, and their nervous system regulate it, what impact can that have on other people? Can it have an impact, and what impact? And they've done really fascinating studies where people that weren't even knowing of each other, not even in physical proximity. So I'm in my apartment over here, someone across town is a part of the same study. And what they've determined, if during this decided period of time, so say at 12 p.m., right, all of the participants, not knowing each other in different houses across a city, right, enter a state of calm, grounded awareness. I'm just going to keep using that language. Really scientifically, for anyone who's interested, it's called heart coherence. I cite a lot of it in my book. But what they've come to see is that joining together, right, in my internal state of heart coherence, of calm, grounded piece, the impact on individuals that weren't even aware of what was happening was so great that in highly crime-ridden cities during that particular hour, a significant reduction in crime happened. Similarly, they replicated the study at a time when there was active war in different regions. Wartime casualties during that moment were reduced as well. And so now let's just apply this to work and the people that were around. If we're able to maintain and return ourselves after an upsetting event to that calm, grounded state, then the signals we're sending to that argumentative colleague across the table, instead of being stressed and clenched and upset and continuing to send signals of threat and stress to the room and that colleague, we're actually shifting the energy. And sometimes, not all the time, that can have a great impact, right? That can actually, like in those cities, reduce crime. It might over time, right, reduce or shift or change without even us having anything to actively say or do with these people around us. Even in terms of just us shifting from reacting to what they're saying to just remaining calm and grounded or returning to calm and grounded as quickly as we can, that might actually be where the greatest impact happens. So I like to end on this because call me hopeful and idealistic, but I truly believe, and the reason why I'm so passionate about this work, I believe this is how universally, as a human culture, if you will, we are, each of us as individuals, quite literally showing up to, as far as I'm concerned, change the world around us because it's real. Again, it's grounded in the science. There's research out there if you're interested in learning more about it. Heart Math Institute, Heart Coherence. Again, I cite a lot of it in my book, but the things that we're talking about have such a far greater impact, again, than many of us even know, that extend well beyond, of course, those individuals closest to us, which will also benefit.
And it is so empowering because you don't need anyone else and you don't give the power over to the person next to you. It stays with you. So yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Nicole. I enjoyed our conversation so much. I'm a fan of your work. We will, of course, link your book, your German book, but also all the other books you've written and things you've done in the show notes. And I just wish you all the best. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Vera, again, for having me, for engaging this conversation. Of course, thank you to your beautiful community for tuning in.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. You enjoyed, the emotional, physical, spiritual level of it. I very much did. I like the work of Dr. Nicole LePera very much. I can recommend her Instagram profile, her work she does for her community, her books. We will link all of that in the show notes. It is not only holistic, which I like because it connects things that are connected, but it's also research-based and comes from someone who has experience in practically working with it. So check out her work. And if you know people for whom this episode or the podcast might be interesting, please feel free to share. I hope you liked our first fully English episode because usually I speak in German in the intro and outro of the English interviews, but we decided why not just do it all in English so these episodes can be shared with people who might not understand German. And so maybe you know people with whom to share this episode. New English interviews are coming out soon. However, our solo episodes, of course, and also the German-speaking interviews will still be in German language. So if you have feedback, if you have anything to add, comments, please check out my Instagram or my LinkedIn and let's chat. Have a great week. I'm looking forward to connecting with you here next week when the next episode is coming out. And all the best. Alles Liebe, deine Vera.